Hey everyone, today we are looking at not just any Grand Archive deck, but my personal favorite Grand Archive deck. This is, yes, a Fire Rai build, which isn't particularly exciting, but we're actually looking at a slight variant, one you maybe haven't taken a look at yet, which is a Rai Mana Weaver build using the Booster Pack level 3 of Rai. This is a slightly different build. It's a little less straightforward, but it is in some ways quite a bit more resilient and has more ways to end the game and is harder to play around than the traditional Rai Stormseer build. So let's jump right into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and I am back again with another Grand Archive deck profile for you guys. Like I mentioned in the intro, this is a Fire Rai deck profile, which, yes, I know, very common. We've actually already done the League Champion deck tech on Fire Rai, but this is a full deck profile. We're going to talk a little bit more about this version of Rai, and this is actually a Rai Mana Weaver deck. Slightly different than a lot of the Rai decks that you end up seeing. A lot of decks are using Stormseer, which is the starter deck version of Rai, who powers up by banishing arcane cards. Instead, we're using Mana Weaver here, and the reason for that is Mana Weaver has some very cool tricks that we can use that allows him to produce a much more robust end game plan, one that is able to, and by that I mean one that's able to play around the opponent's tech a bit more than the Stormseer build, the more straightforward build tends to be able to. And in addition, because we're focusing on things like floating memory, we have some other cool ways of dealing that end game damage that just makes you just a lot harder to deal with in general once you get there. Not to mention having more cards in hand. So let's dive right into the deck list and talk about what we are rocking here. So of course, this is a fire deck, and in set 1, that means Spirit of Fire. I don't know if set 2 will have new spirits, new options, but for now, we got our draw 7 cards. Rai Spellcrafter is our level 1, of course. Put 2 Enlightened counters on him when he comes into play. The ability to remove 3 Enlightened counters to draw a card in this version of the deck is actually not used that commonly. Of course, there will be times when you need to do it to try and find certain things or get an extra card in hand to pay a cost, but actually, unlike some of the other builds of Rai, do not immediately dump your Enlightened counters in this one. You are going to need to hold on to them. Same thing applies when we get to Rai level 2. Of course, you want to be trying to accrue these Enlightened counters as much as possible, just like with any Rai build. So that means playing things on your opponent's turn and your turn, activating these Mage action cards on those both turns so that you can get the activation once per turn on your turn and on your opponent's. I think some people don't realize that about the level 2, so just if you're new to it, I want to mention that again. This is each turn, so yours and your opponent. So try and do that when possible. And then, of course, Rai Mana Weaver is our level 3. So the big thing about this one is this version of Rai has a rest ability, remove 4 Enlightened counters from Rai, and then you get to copy target Mage spell card activation. You may choose new targets for the copy. So that means this is a fast speed ability that allows you to create a copy of a Mage spell card that has not yet resolved. And we're going to talk about all the little tricks that you do with that once we get into the deck list, but that is it's an extremely powerful ability. The main thing I want to say about this is that I think a lot of people shy away from it because of the Enlightened counter cost. It's like, well, I could be drawing cards with Enlightened counters instead. And the way I like to think about this is if you can find one Arcane Blast or one Fireball or something, instead of removing 3 Enlightened counters to draw a random card, you are going to remove 4 Enlightened counters to immediately draw a second copy of that. But it's actually even better than that because of that fast speed. And I think that's really the clincher. So then the big difference is, well, I don't have a massive level. Don't worry about it. We'll show you how we work here with our level, and we're able to pay for Arcane Blast, no problem. Of course, we have a Grand Crusader's Ring. Every deck, if you can afford a Grand Crusader's Ring, should run a Grand Crusader's Ring right now until we get more Divine Relic options. You put this in, it's a go-to, just draw a free card. Very, very awesome card. Orb of Regret, another card that I'm a huge fan of. When your hand is just looking clunky, it's just not coming together, or you need just to try and dig as many cards as possible to find an Arcane Blast or Fireball, Orb of Regret's there for you. Crystal of Empowerment is a very useful card in this build because, again, we do not have that automatic high level that Stormseer does. This is often a go-to card. Of all the cards that materialize, actually, this deck can go so fast that you don't end up materializing a ton of them, but Crystal of Empowerment is one that makes it there probably about half the games. it comes out as the way to help actually close the game out, because when you have multiple Arcane Blast to play, this counts for 2 cards basically for every Arcane Blast you were going to play. So if you multiple, it's like this is materialize this and it's worth 4 cards in your hand at that point, which is obviously awesome. Safeguard Amulet is there for Rai mirrors where you are not able to race the opponent out in time. This can preserve you a turn, especially if they are not playing Mana Weaver Rai. If they're playing regular Rai, this will do a lot more damage. If they're trying to Advent at the Stormcaller you, it's a dead card. So very useful against that. And then the rest of the stuff are just options that you have in the late game when you're not quite finishing your opponent off. Materializing a Tome of Knowledge to then turn it into a Tome of Sacred Lightning is something that you can do just to get a little bit of extra. The level boost here can be a little useful, and then you can use this to get an extra card on your turn. As long as if you can use a floating memory to pay for the Tome of Knowledge, that's obviously best. So that's an option when the game's going pretty late, but a lot of the time the game doesn't go that late with this deck, just sometimes. Speaking of games going late, Arcanist Prism is there. I really like Arcanist Prism as an option when the opponent has intentionally slowed the game down a ton. Say they are like a water deck or a water Xander specifically that has been able to kind of stave off your damage and is getting to the point where they're attempting to get a grind kill on you. Then Arcanist Prism will allow you to do a lot more on your turn than you normally could. You have to keep in mind the trick with Arcanist Prism is that you, with this trigger on the stack, you are able to play anything that you want to, resolve the trigger, put all cards in your memory at the bottom of your deck, and then you still are in your recollection phase. You've just drawn a bunch of cards now, but you haven't yet recollected. So after using the Prism, but before recollecting, you were able to play more fast speed spells from your hand. Then you recollect them back in any of the costs back into your hand. So keep that in mind with Arcanist Prism. That is the trick to do. It's very good with fast speed spells. Great with stuff like our Arcane Sights and our Fireballs. So that's very critical trick to know, and that's where that can really accrue you value as the game is grinding. And then I am playing a copy of Storm Tyrant's Eye. I don't think this is played a ton, but I actually really like it in here because this is a way to dig to an answer. It's sort of a last-ditch effort card, but it does do some work. It is a bit of a gamble. You are going to take some amount of damage, but this can find you the Arcane Blast or can find you a disposition to draw more cards. And keep in mind, you don't have to take the Arcane card. If this ends up flipping you into like a Conduit of the Mad Mage or something, or a Spell Shield Arcane that you don't really care about, maybe it flipped you past a Fireball that you can then grab and put in your hand instead. Or Peer into Mana to be able to get a bunch of Enlighten counters to do some sort of comboing or something on that turn. So it can be a useful card when it comes up. Again, it doesn't come up that often, but occasionally it's there when you need it. So looking at the main deck now, the first thing we're going to do is go through. So again, since we're playing Mana Weaver, we're not trying to exclusively banish arcane cards. We are trying to utilize Fire's favorite thing to do, which is discarding and drawing, and then specifically discarding floating memory cards to get that value. When you discard a floating memory card and then draw a card with like Hasty Messenger, that is actually a plus value in your hand because you'll just use the floating memory card in place of banishing a card from your hand later. So it's like you didn't really discard anything. You just got to straight draw a card. So we really like those benefits here in this deck. Ignite the Soul, of course, we're going to play this as a 4 of. The 1 damage to target unit is actually extremely important. In the early game, you just play this out to get the floating memory for sure, but once you get towards the late game, if the opponent is playing either water or arcane in any way, having an Ignite the Soul can be very, very critical. Again, for this deck, you want to know how opportunity works. So what'll happen is your opponent, you'll go to kill the opponent with Arcane Blast. They will go, okay, I will play Water Barrier, which means the next source of damage is reduced to 1. You let the Water Barrier resolve. Then when both players get opportunity, you get opportunity first. Then you say, okay, with my Arcane Blast still not having resolved, I'm going to add Ignite the Soul to the stack. The Ignite the Soul resolves, deals 1 damage, breaks the Water Barrier. The Water Barrier reduces it to 1, or in this case, the Spell Shield Arcane would eat it and then would only prevent 1 damage instead, and then your blast can resolve and kill them. So that's any fire deck can do this trick because it's a fast speed spell, easy to use. But it's just particularly useful here because it is one of our package of ways of dealing with things that will counter the deck. So keep that in mind. You do want to try to have one of these in the late game, but do not be afraid to play this in the early game because that floating memory is critical. Flame Rune Swordsman is just here for floating memory, really. The 2 damage is nice. One thing this deck can do is it can push a little bit of early damage on the opponent, and that can be helpful. Doing things like igniting the soul in the opponent's champion or playing Flame Rune Swordsman and attacking with it, if that's what you got to do, that can get you those little extra bits of damage to make your total kill value a little bit lower and a little more in reach. So don't be afraid to do that. That can be very useful. But obviously, if you can pitch this, that's better. Idle Thoughts, same thing with this. You really just want to be pitching this to things like Hasty Messenger, if possible, but you can play it if you need to. One thing you can do with Idle Thoughts in this deck is set up the top 4 so that you can play a Creative Shock appropriately. The trick, Creative Shock is a very powerful card, but sometimes it's easy to screw the math up on this. You want to make sure you are drawing the card you want to discard if your hand is very tight. Meaning if you have 4 cards in hand, one of those is one you want to discard, and then one of those is the Creative Shock. You're not going to be able to discard that because you have to spend the other 3 cards to then play the Creative Shock. So think about this when you're playing Idle Thoughts. If you have a Creative Shock in hand, think about how many cards you're going to be drawing, and then make sure the card you want to discard is one you draw off of the Creative Shock so that you can pay other cards to pay its cost. Obviously, that doesn't always come up. Ideally, you'll just get a Hasty Messenger and then pitch the Idle Thoughts to that, and then you'll be all happy. Conduit of the Mad Mage, I also have it at the front here because the big thing about this card is it has floating memory. Now, Conduit is, notice also it's floating memory that is not class bonus tied. Same with Idle Thoughts. Thing to be aware of on Flame Rune Swordsman and Ignite the Soul is that they are class bonus, so they will not help you level from 0 to 1, but they will gladly help you level from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. Conduit of the Mad Mage can help you level from 0 to 1. Beautiful card to see in your opening hand with a Hasty Messenger or a Creative Shock. That's all you want to see. But in the late game, Conduit of the Mad Mage is a sneaky way to increment a whole bunch of damage, especially if you see multiple copies of these. If you see multiple copies of these, you need to start turning on your math brain and figuring this out, because playing 2 of these and then following it up with 3 spells is going to do a total of 2 on the first swing. You play 1 spell and then swing for 1 with each, and then play a second spell, and now you're swinging for 4 more damage, so there's 6 total, and then you play a third spell, and then you swing for 6 more damage, so that's 10 damage total off of there. If any one of those spells was an Arcane Blast, you are probably killing your opponent at that point, or you're very, very close to. So it's important to keep in mind that you can do this, and playing 3 spells, I mean, that's no problem when we're playing cards like Arcane Sight. We're playing Power Overwhelming, there's another free card, and Arcane Disposition. Right there is you've barely spent anything from your hand with those 3 cards, and you have attacked your opponent at least 3 times with Conduit. So this is part of our resiliency, is that the opponent cannot only prepare to deal with Arcane Blasts. If you need to, you can try and set up a Conduit of the Mad Mage kill instead. Hasty Messenger, I mean, if there's a red staple right now, it's probably Hasty Messenger, because this is just so powerful. It deals a little bit of damage. It is annoying to deal with the 2 health is tough for like a just to kill with like a Swift Recruit or Dungeon Guide. You need to actually put a little bit more into it to take it out. And then obviously discarding a floating memory and drawing a card is just a powerful play. So we play 4 of this. Now we play 2 Cemetery Sentry, and Cemetery Sentry is really here as our we have Hasty Messenger at home. Hasty Messenger. It is not nearly as good as Hasty Messenger because it only can discard Fire Element cards, and it does cost more, and it just gets +1 attack for what it gets, and it only happens once. Hasty Messenger occasionally will last a second turn, and then you can use it again. Beautiful when you get to do that, but you do not always get to do that, and you never get to do that with Cemetery Sentry. So this card just feels a little underpowered compared to Hasty Messenger. So we play just a couple copies of it because really you need to see these discard outlets in the early game. And so it's just there because that's what you need to see. In set 2, if we find anything else that gets to discard and draw cards a little more consistently, it's going to go right into the deck in the place of Cemetery Sentry, and possibly in place of other cards too, because of how important it is to see those effects. Creative Shock. Okay, so Creative Shock, things to know about this. I mean, if you've looked at Fire decks, you know this card already, but it is fast speed, so it's one that you can activate on your opponent's turn to trigger Rai Archmage. It is typically in your best interest to discard a floating memory card, even if it's non-fire element. Conduit of the Mad Mage or Idle Thoughts, discarding Creative Shock would be ideal. Feel free to play this on turn 1, even if you don't have the class bonus. even if you're pitching a fire element card, just to make sure you can get things set up. Although again, that will not help you level from 0 to 1. Keep that in mind. I think it just kind of depends on what's in your hand. But when you do get to use this to pitch, especially pitching a floating memory card when you're already a mage, and you get to then deal 2 more damage to something, maybe your opponent, to again lower that threshold to take them out. Or if there is an ally who you think is beating you down a little too fast, you can use that to target that as well. Then that's obviously even better. The big thing to keep in mind again about Rai decks, if you're not familiar, you are going to take a beating. Your health is a resource. You are okay with letting yourself take some damage. You just need to be aware all the time of what your opponent's clock is looking like. And at any point in time, if the opponent's clock is looking like they are probably going to take you out before you can take them out, that's when you have to start dealing with the board. But otherwise, it is okay, absolutely okay, to direct damage at your opponent's champion, because that threshold lowering is very useful. Okay, so Magus Disciple. This is a great mage staple card. Again, the class bonus on death draw card only happens when you're level 1, so it is a little, unlike Library Witch, you can't just throw this out on level 0, and we are not playing Library Witch, you'll notice in this build. But in exchange, this does do a damage to something, which again, lowering that threshold, and the +1 level will also lower our threshold for being able to play things like our Arcane Blast later, or will power up things like our Peer into Mana, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it is a useful card at any stage of the game, really. But the main thing you want to do with this is, especially once you're on turn 1, or when you're on level 1 or level 2, it is ideal to play this and then Cremation Ritual it to get to draw 3 cards, which I'll just look at that right now here, actually. So Cremation Ritual, of course, as initial cost to activate it, sacrifice an ally, draw 2 cards. So you spend 3, and then if you are sacking Magus Disciple, you draw 3. Sack any of the other ones, you draw 2, but they've already drawn you cards as well. It is just a way to turn, you make sure you attack with them first, but it's a way to turn your allies then into more cards. And a lot of decks will be attacking your allies right away because they are cognizant of that threshold lowering that the allies are doing for them. So the great thing is, against a Lorraine deck, you can use this just to take out your allies and deny them the card draw when they hit level 2, which can be pretty important. Can be really good. So Cremation Ritual, easy 4 of in here, and of course Magus Disciple on 4 of, because it works very well with that. Dungeon Guide we have in here at 3 right now. I know that is blasphemous to some people, and that is okay. You can run, actually, the 4th Dungeon Guide is in the sideboard here instead. You can absolutely mainboard the 4th Dungeon Guide instead, and if you're going to do that, I would actually suggest going 3 Magus Disciple for Dungeon Guide instead. I think that is perfectly fine to do. I find that I want to see exactly 1 Dungeon Guide per game with this deck, and 3 is with the amount we're drawing, 3 feels like you pretty consistently get to do that. But if you want to be 100% sure, and of course that's why the 4th one's in the sideboard, because against some decks like Fire Lorraine, I want to be 110% sure that I can outrace them. And that's where I will side in the 4th Dungeon Guide. But especially if your meta is a lot of decks like that, go ahead, slap that 4th Dungeon Guide in the main. For now, we are just using 3. If you do not have Dungeon Guide, you can still play this deck. Don't fret about it, because, I have games that I win without playing Dungeon Guide at all. But if you've got your hands on some Dungeon Guides, I would slap them in there. It's pretty good. Increasing Danger. So this is a dangerous card to play, but it is very, very good in the right matchups. The big thing about Increasing Danger is you only want to play this if you are playing a matchup where you are feeling confident about the race being in your favor, okay? It really comes down to a tempo analysis. I think we've tried to break this down to like what decks you play this against, but there's still variations in that. Like if we're trying to name a specific champion or element or anything, I like to break it down like this. If I'm sitting down and I go, boy, my opponent is fairly likely to get to race me to a certain point where I am out of the game. Either that's them killing me or them like getting a Xander combo together or something. Against those decks, I will choose not to play Increasing Danger a lot of the time. That would be some other Fire, like a Fire Merlin decks. We're actually going to do a deck profile on that very soon. Mitch has got that one cooked up for you. I would not play Increasing Danger against Fire Merlin, because like the Erupting Rhapsody Fire decks will be able to kill you a little faster. That's one of your flaws. If you are unable to string together things perfectly, they've got to kill on you faster. So in that case, I would just use this to pay for costs, or I would pitch it to Sentry or something. You're not going to want to play it. But against the other decks where you actually have the edge on them, that's Wind Lorraine decks. You can go faster than those decks. other like basically wind decks in general, mid-range kind of decks like that. Increasing danger is beautiful against those. Some fire decks, other Fire Rai decks, you can actually probably kill them a little faster too. It might be okay to play it then, but you have to really suss out exactly what version of the deck they're playing. Despite that, though, when you play this card, you draw a card, and then each player draws a card of memory. So you're going to pay this card, get 2, your opponent just gets 1. It's kind of keeping everyone even, but what it's really doing for you is it's helping you see more cards, helping you get to the important cards in your deck. That's why we play it in here. It's you pay 2 and you see 2. You play 1 card and you see 2 cards. That's why it's really useful in those matchups for sure. Fireball we have here as a 3-of. Fireball is our alternate win condition card, and the important part about this card is that it is fast speed. Again, we're going to talk just a moment about how all the comboing works because we're about to get to the arcane stuff, but Fireball gets to be played on the stack with other things yet to resolve, and that can make all of the difference in the world for this card. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Peer into mana. This is actually a very important card in this deck because the big thing is that Mana Weaver is Enlighten counter hungry and has no other real ways to gain them. And Peer into Mana is a beautiful card to play once you are hit level 2 or something, when you're just trying to set up to go into level 3 and win the game. Drop a Peer into Mana. You get to place somewhere between usually 4 to 5 Enlighten counters, depends on if you have like a Magus Disciple that's sitting out on the board or something. And that is plenty. Plus you get to get a trigger from Rai Archmage when you do that as well. So often it can be 5 to 6 Enlighten counters, and that'll get you plenty to be able to use a Power Overwhelming, get to a high level, and then still be able to activate Mana Weaver to win the game. Or if you need to, draw cards with some of those. So great card to have in here. We have it as a 3-of. We really just want to see, you kind of want to see 1 copy of it in the game, and then you're good. All right, so let's talk about our arcane cards. The first thing we'll just talk about, we have 2 copies of Arcane Sight. Arcane Sight is actually, I would say this is really one of the more flexible slots in the deck. So I just realized all the numbers are off. Just fix that for you. So it's one of the more flexible slots in the deck. This is where I would look at any of your sideboard cards you want to bring in. You can pull this out for it, but it is just a really solid card that kind of glues together your turn, gives you that extra level to make your blast cheaper, finds a different card to replace it, triggers Conduit of the Mad Mage, triggers Rai Archmage as well. Yeah, it's just a solid card. It's a fast card as well. So if you need to use it on your opponent's turn, if you've done some math on accruing some Enlighten counters, you can totally do that too. Definitely an option. But also a very replaceable card when you're sideboarding. Power Overwhelming is here at 3-of because this is a critical combo card. You want to find this. You want to find 1 copy of it at some point. It is another fast spell, and it's remove any amount of Enlighten counters to bump your level up by that many. So you're going to use this to go into your turns when you're going to try to kill your opponent with Arcane Blast or Fireball. Keep in mind that it is a fast spell, though. That can be pretty important, depending on how everything shakes out, what your hand is looking like. I would generally when you use this card, you want to look at your hand and do your math. Sometimes I dump all my cards because if I've already seen 2 or 3 copies of Arcane Blast, and I don't suspect my opponent's going to try and do like a Veiling Breeze or something in response, or a Water Barrier, I will go ahead and just dump everything and then go for blast kills. But if my opponent is either going to be playing some sort of interaction against me, so they aren't playing a fire deck and they have some cards in hand, is basically what that comes down to, then you want to make sure Mana Weaver is activatable, and you only want to pitch down until you have 4 Enlightened counters left so you can still activate Mana Weaver. Arcane Blast. It kills the opponent. It does 11 damage. With Mana Weaver copying it, it does 22 damage, which obviously is plenty to kill the opponent. But the big issue with Arcane Blast is it's slow, right? And the efficiency thing, but we deal with that with Power Overwhelming or by just paying a bunch of cards because we are going to have a lot of cards in hand with this deck. Arcane Blast does 11 damage. Now, let's talk about how to play this, okay? When you get to this kill turn, if your opponent has some sort of interaction on them, what you want to be doing is Arcane Blast. At that point, opportunity starts with you. You will, instead of, a lot of people will try and go Arcane Blast and then activate Mana Weaver right away. At that point, then your opponent can play a Veiling Breeze or Water Barrier or something and prevent a lot more damage than you really want to let them prevent, okay? Especially if it's something like Veiling Breeze or popping a Safeguard Amulet. You want to try and stop them from preventing as much damage as possible. So instead what you do is you go, I'll activate Arcane Blast. The opponent will then go, and then you say, I'll pass opportunity. the opponent has a choice now. They either let the Arcane Blast resolve and deal 11 damage. Generally, you're hoping to either have a second Arcane Blast or a Fireball, so you can still activate your copy. If you're kind of Gambit, if your Gambit is your opponent's just going to let the damage resolve. And you often do have that. If they want to then prevent the damage, they have to use their opportunity to play their Veiling Breeze or play their Safeguard Amulet or something. And then when they put that ability on the stack is when you go activate Mana Weaver with my new opportunity, put the copy of Arcane Blast on the top over the Safeguard Amulet. Or, for example, then they can play Safeguard Amulet and go, okay, then activate Fireball and then copy Fireball. And now they've got the 11 damage that's going to come at them, with which will have some amount prevented from the amulet or the Veiling Breeze. But then on top of that, you'll have the whatever amount of damage, 10, 11 damage from Fireball, and then another copy of that on top of that. And that makes it so instead of getting them to prevent a good 12, 16, whatever damage from their prevention spells, they're preventing like 4, and that's all. And the rest of it goes through. And this is how you secure the kills on the opponent when they are not able to. A savvy opponent, now I'm going to go ahead and give the tip to this. A savvy opponent playing against this will use their Safeguard Amulet in response to either during your Recollection phase or potentially in response to Power Overwhelming. However, that doesn't work super well if you have a second Power Overwhelming in hand, because then you can just pass the turn. Or in response, you can Power Overwhelming and then Fireball the opponent and then copy it. If they use it during Recollection phase, then you just have to maybe turtle down, unless you have a Fireball kill, Power Overwhelming, Fireball, Mana Weaver activation kill in hand. Again, this is where this fast speed thing is really important. You always have that ability to respond to what your opponent is doing and get that damage in before the prevention resolves. And you want to be thinking about that constantly with this deck. So I hope that kind of makes sense how the combos of Mana Weaver can be used to get around the ways that people try to prevent things. And then of course, if they're going to try and respond on top of all that stuff with a Water Barrier or a Spell Shield, that's where the Ignite the Soul comes in. Boom, pierce it, and then all your damage gets to go through after that. So we have a lot of options, very robust deck. And then failing all that, Attack with Conduits is still on the table too. Our last arcane cards are Arcane Disposition, which is just a wonderful card. Sometimes you're going to get to level 3 and you're not going to be able to kill them immediately. That's obviously pretty common, because especially if you like Dungeon Guide and you only have 4 cards left in hand or something, you can't go for the kill, but you can draw a whole bunch of cards with Arcane Disposition. Of course, with this card, you want to play out anything that you can after you draw those cards, which most of the time you will be able to. You have a lot of cheap things in here that you can draw and play, so it's very, very rare. I've never really had to discard anything that mattered with Arcane Disposition, and if you can be really savvy and line it up, you can just end up just discarding Floating Memory cards instead, and then use them to put out an Arcanist Prism or a Tome of Knowledge or something on the next turn when you're going for the kill. So yeah, this is what accrues a ton of cards for you as you're building up. Same with Peer into Mana when you get to level 3 and you can have a higher level. And then our last cards in here are 2 Spell Shield Arcane, and that is because there are tons of decks in the meta right now that Spell Shield Arcane will save you against. From Wind Lorraine, playing her Super Infusion Giant Attack, Spell Shield it, you'll be fine that turn then. To Fire Lorraine using Devastating Blow or using Rending Flames. To other Rai decks playing Arcane Blast. Spell Shield Arcane, if you resolve this and actually prevent the massive amount of damage from your opponent's attack, you will basically win the game on the spot. It's going to be very hard for your opponent to actually not die on the next turn, because you're going to have so many line counters to work with. You get to draw some cards if you need to. You can activate a huge Power Overwhelming. Yeah, it's just quite powerful. All right, so then the last thing we're going to talk about is just what is in the sideboard here. And while I don't have it particularly visible at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and just mouse over the cards that you can see here. In our sideboard, I am currently playing, and you can go ahead and adjust your sideboard for whatever decks you're playing against in your meta. I'm playing 2 more copies of Spell Shield Arcane, and my plan is to swap out the Arcane Sights for more Spell Shield Arcane when I feel like I am not racing my opponent fast enough. For example, against a Fire Lorraine deck, I will probably side this in, as well as the Dungeon Guide that I'm about to talk about here, because I need to hit that higher level faster than them, and I often need to have a Spell Shield in hand in order to make it to the next turn to go for the kill. So I want to have as many copies of this as possible, so I'm going to side out the Sights to put in 2 more of those. We have 2 copies of Anger the Skies. Anger the Skies is not super useful in the current metagame because you can just race out a lot of the ally-oriented decks instead, but I could see an occasional, particularly like Phalanx Captain focus Lorraine build, or a Sylvie build that it just happens to be beating up on you for some reason. You can side in. I put 2 copies of Anger the Skies in here. I either side out the spell shields for them if the spell shields aren't useful, or side out the sights for them if the spell shields are useful. Have a copy of Nullifying Lantern. Put this in against Erupting Rhapsody just to put it in its place. Against Fire Lorraine, you actually probably don't have enough time to really activate this. Against the Erupting Rhapsody decks, though, it's the only real way they're going to be able to secure that kill on you, whereas the Lorraine decks can still use Devastating Blow or something. And so Nullifying Lantern against like a Fire Merlin deck just has no other option but to try and find Spurn to Ash, and that's going to take them out. I have one more copy of Fireball in here. This is the 4th copy of Fireball, and I like this in decks where they are actively trying to stop your plans with things like Water Barriers and Spell Shield Arcanes, because having the 4th copy of the Fast Speed Kill spell is going to just make more consistent those tricks with opportunity that you use to play around what your opponent is doing. And then finally, the 4th copy of Dungeon Guide. If you gotta go fast, if it's Sonic time, you're putting in Dungeon Guide number 4 just to make sure you can consistently hit that level. You'll be impressed as long as you see in your early game, your discard and your floating memory stuff, you are going to go way faster than most opponents can keep up with. And have way more cards in hand than they want you to have in hand. You're going to see them groaning when they ask for your hand count. And you're like, I got 8. And they're like, oh no, I can't win this game. And that feels really good. But sometimes you just need that extra edge, that extra Dungeon Guide. So that's what that is there for. All right, guys. Well, I've talked for plenty of time about this, but that is the Fire Mana Weaver Rai. I hope you give this deck a try. If you have the Rai starter deck, it does not take a whole lot to build this deck. You do need to find some conduits. Power Overwhelming is a very cheap rare. It's not, or a super rare in the main set, rare and Prelude. It's everywhere though. It's in the starter decks. A lot of people have copies of this card. Not hard to find. Cemetery Sentry is a rare, but like, actually, if you didn't even play this card, that would be okay. We've tested a number of other ideas in here, things like running 4 Idle Thoughts instead of the 2 Cemetery Sentries. I think that's okay, but I really like having that, even though it's not the best discard effect. Being able to have that in more games than less is probably better in my mind. You can play Library Witch in here, maybe if you like it instead of Magus Disciple. I find Library Witch dies very easily to, random Dungeon Guide attacks and stuff, so it really hardly does its thing. But to its credit, it lets you Cremation Ritual it on turn 0 and draw the extra card. There's definitely some options you can play in here. However, I feel like the deck is quite tight. It's hard to find things that I would honestly cut for any of that stuff. So I'd be interested if you have versions of this deck or cards that you think have worked better for you. Go ahead and let us know in the comments down below. Or if you build this deck and give it a try, let us know how it is going for you. This deck I find quite powerful, but you do want to see those discard and floating memory things. Make sure you are trying to prioritize getting those in and then comboing correctly. There is a skill curve to this in learning how to operate around opportunity and set up your win conditions. And if you enjoy that kind of gameplay, then boy, I think you will love this deck. I hope you guys give it a try, and I hope you enjoyed this deck profile, at least just learning about the deck and what is possible in Grand Archive. This is, like I said, I think my favorite deck right now in the game, and the deck that I'm going to continue to try and perfect, and I'm looking forward to what Fractured Crown is going to bring to it. So hope you guys enjoyed that one. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure if you did, give it a like and sub to the channel for more awesome Grand Archive content, and let us know in the comments what you thought about it. That's going to be it for me today. We will see you guys next week with another Grand Archive video for sure, and other great TCG content here on Main Deck. So thanks for watching, and have a good one. Thanks for watching another Main Deck video. Main Deck is sponsored by Troll and Toad. Visit trollandtoad.com and use discount code MAINDECK5 to get 5% off your purchase and support the channel. And by JWW Sports Cards and Gaming. Visit jwwcards.com. And by our amazing patrons. Get exclusive content and other cool perks on the Main Deck Patreon. And hey, while you're here, I bet you'd like one of these videos. Go ahead, click one. I know you're gonna love it.